I don't know where to actually start, on this.
You
My,
remember, do you remember one time you were talking about sitting on your aunt's porch
yeah,
listening to
well,
them tell
this is,
tales?
uh, back when I was a boy. See, we was, uh, Daddy and Mother and I and my sisters lived in the old Nelson house with Aunt Maytie and Uncle Dick. And that was the Nelson family home, just on the east side of Hazelhurst. And it was a big old house, had a big porch all along the front of it. And usually during the on like Sunday afternoon, Uncle Ben would ride his horse out. Aunt Elma would bring her car would bring out her out. Uh, Aunt Maytie and Uncle Lewis and Daddy, they would all sit on the front porch and talk about the family. Now, this was this was in the 40s, basically. From time we lived there from like 1935 to 47, and but we us kids would usually sit on the steps. They had a little bench thing over there, and those grown folks would. That's all they would do, would talk about the family and who married who and all of this type of stuff. And I don't know why we found it so interesting, because normally we would be down in the pasture hunting snakes, the boys and all, me and my cousins. But anyway, we would listen to the old tales, and then later on, um, we got this Nelson book. This lady came around, I think it was about 1946 or 7, and she stayed with Aunt Elma, and she got the family information. And I find there's some errors in what Aunt Elma told her, and I was just wondering if Aunt Elma maybe had had a couple of two more of that tomato wine she used to give us when we'd go down there. Daddy and I would go down there, and she would come back to this closet back behind her bedroom, and she'd pull out this. I think she'd pull out a bottle of wine to give Daddy some, and then they would always pour me a little glass of the tomato wine, and I had never heard of tomato wine before, but she would do that. We, but anyway, we would go down there and do that, but anyway, basically the book is good. The information before that is good, and I have a list here that we'll make you a copy of. That I went through the book, and this is where you go back from Benjamin Franklin Nelson back for a couple of 100 years there, till 100 and so years to the ancestors before them. And but anyway, we would listen to those tales, and the Nelson family had been an old family, and they were very prominent at one time. And then my grandfather had married Maggie Flowers, and she was, I think, probably wealthy, from what I can maintain, what I understand. But anyway, even before this, we would go down to Aunt Elma would come out with a chauffeur, and she had a Buick V8, and she'd get Daddy and maybe Uncle Lewis and 2 or 3 of us kids, and we would all go down to old Holly Grove Plantation. And this is when I was probably about 5 years old. And Uncle Flowers, Buddy Nelson we call him, he was living there at the time. This was a big treat for us. The house was 3 stories at that time, and I'm not sure where it was 3 stories. The first floor was way up off the ground, and then they had the next floor they had a hall down the middle, 4 big rooms, and then you went up the stairs. We go up there, and the top floor was a ballroom. It didn't have anything up there. That's where they had their dances, I guess. But we would run around the porches. They had the porches on 3 sides of the big old square-like house, and we would run around those porches and look and see what we could see. You know, me and my little cousins, and when they went with us. And later they tore the top floor off of that, 1 or 2. They cut it down to 1 floor and put an attic on it, and that was after the Nelson didn't own it anymore. Daddy tells me about Graves Nelson, y'all's father, when Graves lived at Holly Grove, and I think he was farming that for my grandfather, and my daddy was farming Elmwood, which was down, 3 miles down the road there. And Graves Nelson later owned Elmwood. I know that because we would go down and hunt. And but Daddy tells about they was 2 bachelors at the time, and they came in one time, and they was hungry, and they didn't have any food, it being 21 miles from Hazelhurst and stuff, and they saw some little pigs running around out in the yard, and they caught one of those pigs, and Daddy said they shaved him with their razor, and then they baked him, cleaned him and baked him to have some food to eat,
Oh my goodness.
And Graves Nelson said it was so lonely down there, he'd be sitting out on the porch, and said he'd wave at anything that came by, even if it was an old cow. And anyway, in later years, this was Graves would come down, and he would bring Boots and Elmo, and we would all go down to the old Elmwood squirrel hunting, and they would come out and get us, and I was probably about 12 years old, maybe a little older, and the only hunting sack I had was a bank bag, one of them old cloth canvas bank bags, and Mama had sewed me a strap on it to put over my shoulder. Anyway, it was a black guy that lived down there that had a squirrel dog, and he lived right behind the Artesian Spring. Have you ever been to the Artesian Spring? On Elmwood, Daddy said when he lived there, he had trouble getting water. And anyway, a seismograph crew came by, and they were shooting these tests along the road. This was a little narrow road, and it had some big beech trees, white-looking beech trees there. And right across from them was where they had tested that. A seismograph crew had tested that, and when they did, they got an artesian well that shot up in the air about 20 feet, and so they was washing the road out, so they dynamited it and put 2 big concrete culverts in there about 3 foot in diameter, and they knocked a hole in one side of the culvert, and water would spew out, and I think of both of them, and we would we would clean our squirrels and put them on a board where that water spewed out there. Of course, we drank the water and everything. And it was just cold as it would be. It would chill those squirrels, see. Boots and Elmo both had pump shotguns. I think there was a Remington Model 12 pump shotguns that they had duck hunted with. And they would bring them, and all I had was my gun was sawed off to 27.5 inches. All the choke was gone out of it, but I would wind up, I'd kill about as many squirrels as they would. And we had some good times there. Graves would come down, like I said, in hunting season, and then he had business down there. He had a lawsuit and down there about Double Ditch Swamp, they call it. And it was only 40 acres. It was between Holly Grove and it was down next to Foster's Creek. And between Holly Grove and Elmwood. And they had this lawsuit with Mr. Huntington. He had bought the Willing place, which was across Foster's Creek, and they said it belonged to them, and it probably wasn't worth much, you know, considering the 40 acres, but they were drilling an oil well on it, and that made it. Anyway, Daddy testified that he had farmed it and all for the family, but in the long run, they gave it to Huntington, the 40 acres to Huntington. And, we were down there one time hunting, and Daddy and I was walking around the road. He was showing me where he used to live. The old house had burned, but where he used to live. And it was this old nigger. He lived in a little shotgun house there. It was around from the spring. And he said, "Don't I know you?" And I said, I think I knows you. Said, he says, I told him who it was, George Nelson. "Oh yeah, I knows y'all. And his name was George Washington. And anyway, he said, "I got something I want to give you." And we walked in the back of the back room of this little shotgun house, and he had jugs of moonshine there. And he said he had some in a bottle. He said, "Now this is my cork whiskey." He said, "I like it. I'd like this." And he would char corks and poke down in the bottle of whiskey. And I took of course it was cold that morning. I took a little swig of that. I thought it was terrible, you know. And tasted like charred corks, you know. But anyway, we went. He also had some of that other moonshine, and he poured a little out in a jar top. And he said, "Watch this," and he lit a match up about 2 feet above where he lit it down there. And of course, alcohol has no color to the flame, you know. And he said, "Put your hand up there," and you could feel the heat up there. It was burning, you know. But anyway, he said, I said, "Well, where did you get this?" He said, "Oh, the mail carrier brings it to me, you know." The mail carrier came down the road one time a week. But anyway, we about that time we walked back outside, and Graves drove up, and he said, "George Washington," said, "I ain't seen you in years." Said, "Last time I saw you, you was up in the penitentiaries for making whiskey." I heard of you. Said you was up in the penitentiary for making whiskey. And I guess, I don't know what, I guess he just sold that whiskey down there, you know, because he didn't seem to have any place to, you know, to live. He was just staying in one of them little empty shacks. And we went down one time and camped in a cotton house, Daddy and I and my cousin and my brother-in-law and down at Elmwood, and we stayed 2 days and we killed all kind of squirrels down there. But Graves and Boots wasn't there at the time. Later on, incidentally, you know, I went in the Air Force, and I was out at Wichita Falls, Texas, and I got a letter. It says Thomas H. Nelson, and it came to me. They had the mail real messed up about that time in the Air Force. They were drafting all these people for the Korean War, and of course we had volunteered. So I just walked over there, and I found Boots, and I gave him his letter. And I didn't even know he was in the Air Force or anything.
He was in the same place you were?
He was
stationed at Wichita Falls.
We was both going to the A&E school they had there, Aircraft and Engine Mechanic School. And but anyway, that was later on. But we went any number of times down that squirrel hunting, and of course later on, you know, I got out of high school, the Korean War broke out, and we was there. We was gone, and then he sold that place, and Graves sold the place, but we still he sold it to Crosby Lumber Company, I think, and down in South Mississippi there, and then but we could still go down there and hunt. Of course, by that time they had sold Old Holly Grove, and but anyway, that was time. And then before that, when we started deer hunting in the late 40s, early 50s, we would go to up to Graves' house and Boots and his house at Chatham, and go around there, and we would go hunting with them. We'd go back towards Chatham and take that road to the left and go there over the levee. It was a sandbar or something over there. Everybody hunted on. And they had it leased for cattle. Graves said he had it part of it leased for
across the
cattle.
lake from the house.
Yeah, it was across the lake and across the levee on over there
Yeah.
from the house
He did have a lot of cattle on him.
over there at that one time, you know, and we hunted over there with them, and I can remember one instance. Boots would he had an old Jeep, and he would kind of carry me around, and we went back to where the camp was, and we went out the north side, and then you could come back through the woods. The camp was over there at some place they called the Blue Hole. It was a slough that ran up in there. And so anyway, we got over there, and the game warden was over there. And I forget what his name was. It seemed like he was Brown or something like that. No, Kelly. It was a Mr. Kelly. And Boots, he got up and went over there and shook Mr. Kelly's hand when he came up there and everything. And a few minutes later, I noticed Boots got in the Jeep, and he headed out the back way up there to, he said, I'm going to go and check, get these other guys, see what they killed anything. He went over to where we could hear some of them coming in. And so anyway, after a while, he didn't come back, and the other people came in, and I asked, I said, what happened to Boots? He said, oh, he didn't have his hunting license. He went out the other way. The guy waited till everybody got to camp, and then he had to check all the hunting licenses. And I never will forget that. But one morning they was all tied up there, and one afternoon, and they said, you want to go fishing over in the Blue Hole? And said, I got some work I got to do, but I'll tell you how to get over there. So I went over there in the boat over there, and I started fishing, and it was the boat was leaking, and every once in a while I'd have to take a can in it and bail the water out, and I'd fished around a little bit, and then went on up a little bit, and this alligator rolled off in the water, and I decided I didn't want to fish in there in a leaky boat, you know, because I was fixing to come out. Looked kind of like it was going to rain too, you know, so I did. I couldn't fish with that alligator and that leaky boat out there, you know.
About what year was that?
this was, this would be the late 40s.
Late forties.
My brother-in-law he had a truck and he'd take Daddy and I up there. I graduated from high school in 1950. And, of course, in those days, they still had the old store and the sawmill and all that, you know, right there at the house. And of course, Lake Jackson was right across from the house, and they had filled in with sawdust where they could go across
Yeah.
Lake Jackson to feed their cattle and all. But anyway, that was you know, we had some good times and stuff. Then of course, Daddy, it was always he really liked Great Drays, and I guess they you know, had been friends for a long time, you know, when they was younger. And
Well, how were their ages? I mean, how old were they?
Daddy was born in 1887, and I think Graves was born in 90 or 91. Let's see, I may have it down here.
91, I think.
Uh,
So they weren't that far apart.
no, they was only
Few
uh,
years.
a few years apart. It's in this book. I had it. I thought I had it somewhere.
And
But,
did they live close to each other?
well, at one time they did when one of them was at Holly Grove and one of them was at Elmwood.
Elmwood, okay.
Elmwood was you went past Holly Grove, and it was about 3 miles. Man, it was a little old road, and it was some blue clay down there, and if down some hills, reddish and bluish clay, and if it rained, it was hard. You had to go out the other way. It was from Elmwood, but
Now, how many acres did Holly Grove have?
Holly Grove had 4,400 acres,
4,400. And
and Elmwood had 1,100 acres.
well, where is Elmwood? I mean, who bought Elmwood?
Your daddy sold Elmwood to, I think it was Crosby Lumber Company.
You mean he owned at one time Holly Grove and Elmwood?
No, he just owned, Aunt Elma had Holly Grove at
Oh,
the
okay.
time,
Did
and
you
he
know?
had Elmwood.
But wasn't Daddy born in
Holly Grove?
I would think he probably was. Now,
I always heard that he was born at Holly Grove,
what
but I don't know the circumstances why he was there or anything. Or
Well-
if that was where they lived.
and I'm not sure about that, but when my grandfather George B. Nelson, when he married what was the name? Maggie Flowers, and she had lived in Hazelhurst, and she told them that she wouldn't live way down in the country and marry him, but she wouldn't live down there. So that's when they built the house just east of Hazelhurst. And so in that time, he had people, grandfather had people running Holly Grove, or more or less overseeing it down there. And we ran into all of these, it was a box of deeds and legal papers that turned up at Aunt Matey's, that had come from Aunt Sissy's after Aunt Matey died. And
Which one is Aunt Sissy?
Aunt Sissy, Aunt Elma.
Oh,
Daddy called her Sissy, and we called her
well, we called her cousin.
couldn't. Well, anyway, it was all of these loan things in there. When my grandfather had borrowed $10,000 from his wife, and it was probably 6 or 8 of those things, and it had all these people, these old deeds. The old deed to the Linden, the where grandpa and great grandpa and grandmother are buried. They had the deed to that, and they gave it to Warren Hood when he bought a bunch of the furniture that Aunt Matey and Aunt Elma had, you know, to go in that house down there when he remodeled it. And incidentally, the deed accepted the cemetery. I think it was a 50 by 50 foot plot. And it was not transferred to, it was a deed gift where Benjamin Franklin Nelson, great grandpa, had given Linden to my daddy, my grandfather, George B. Nelson, as a deed gift. I remember that was on the front of the thing. And they had all kind of deeds in there where they had bought 320 acres for $320 and picked it up at tax sales like 40 acres for $1.95. And they said that at one time, Benjamin Franklin Nelson and all of them and his children and their family owned about 10,000 acres. That was Cousin Ed Brown's place, Captain Ed Brown, who married our grandfather's sister. I think she was, they call her Betty Porter Nelson. She married Captain Ed Brown, and the Brown place was on around past Elmwood, and of course the great-grandfather's sister, Willing, I think she was a Willing, and they owned the property like 2,300 acres the other side of Foster Creek, back towards Hazelhurst. So, you know, they said the family had about 10 square miles, I think, in there at one time. And I had been, it was part of Harley Grove that we never went over. It was just back in the hills, back behind the house. It was just hills and hollows, and they was all moss and stuff. Now, between Holly Grove House and Foster's Creek was probably close to 2 miles, and that was all farmland. They had a slough and stuff they called Holly Grove Bottom. We used to always go down there and hunt, had fox squirrels down there. But anyway, let's back up a little bit. Benjamin Franklin Nelson, he came from Virginia.
Do you know anything about where they came from before Virginia? How they came to this country?
Well, all of these on this sheet lived in Virginia.
Well,
Okay, now, we go back a little further than that. Let's see. Okay, here it is. We looked at the pedigree chart, and this was John Nelson. He was the guy at the top of the list here.
Yeah,
Okay, now when you went back from him,
thank you.
they had they got the name mixed up. It was Wilson, but that was real understandable because and then they had a Jordan Nelson back in the, what was that, 1500 and something?
it says 1602.
1602 in York, England. And that's supposed to be where they came from. I think we had one sometime. It even went back a little further than that. But this threw them off here. Let me see. It was John Nielsen Wilson. Now let me tell you what Daddy and his father. They when they signed their name, the Nelson started like this. It started up and the end part. And I think that got misinterpreted as Wilson. See, it's somewhere down the line. But Daddy signed his name that way when I was a little boy, you know. Well, he did all his life. It was,
Is
it,
it
it started with an N and then a
N-I-L?
N-E-L-S-O-N.
N-E-L,
Of course, that far back is kind of hard to,
When that, did y'all get this from the internet?
that came off the internet.
Is that right?
somewhere.
Let's see. I'm gonna have to